Hi, dear ones. This is Wasim Maisra. Hope you are doing well. I am so happy. I'm delighted. I'm honored to receive Vicki Noble today in my YouTube channel. So, welcome, welcome, welcome. And it's like, oh, how are you doing today?
Well, much better now that we're talking.
Yes,
Early morning for me. What time for you?
it's late. It's 7 p.m. at the moment
Uh-huh,
that
uh-huh.
we are
Wow.
recording today.
Yeah.
So, I don't know how I can start, by introducing you. I came through your work. I mean, I read a lot, but when I was doing this research about the Amazons, I came through your writings, and then we met, and then I discovered the Motherpeace Tarot, and I'm like, oh my goodness, I want to have all your books. So I got a lot. This is the last one that I received, Motherpeace, and
Wonderful.
of course, I have to honorable mention to this book.
Uh-huh.
Also, really amazing, amazing. I'm gonna dive into it hopefully by the end of the year. And of course, the double goddess that is linked to my work. And today we are going to focus on Motherpeace Tarot for those who are into tarot and cards. I am sure you know this deck. So, Vicky, do you want to introduce yourself and maybe also tell us how you came to the world of tarot?
Well, like so many things that happened in the 1970s, it was very magical and synchronistic, and it was as if everything flowed together so that when you look back on it, you can make a narrative as if it was unfolding in an ordinary way. But for us at the time, it was extraordinary. So I had moved to Berkeley in 1976. I was a young feminist. I think I was turning 30 the next year. So that was my Saturn return when I moved to Berkeley with my two daughters and my partner, Karen Vogel. And we knew that we wanted to do a research project. Karen is an anthropologist, I'm a historian, both of us radical feminists, and we wanted to unearth and really dig deep to find what happened to women's power. Because we understood, even in a small way at the time, that there had been cultures a long time ago that were female centered and at the very least egalitarian, if not really governed by women. So we were keen to find the roots of that history, herstory, we called it.
Yes.
Um, and instead of a book coming out of that process, we ended up with the tarot cards. It was a 5-year process from the time we moved to Berkeley and started to go to the amazing resources in the Bay Area. The Berkeley, the UC Berkeley Library just in itself was amazing. They allowed us in those days back into the stacks, so we would look up one book in the card catalog, but then we would go back to that shelf and we would find so many things that we never could have discovered on our own. And the Stanford Library, same thing. The amazing artistic heritage that the matriarchal early cultures left us. It was just a treasure trove. And so we were in that process, and then a friend brought a tarot deck. And it was the first time I had ever seen a tarot deck. That was probably 1977. Um, so I started to use the tarot cards. I thought they were amazing. And even though it was the weight deck, it was very, very male biased, very traditional, um, white men on horseback, basically, and symbols. But there were some female energies, archetypes, the empress, the high priestess, that really drew us, really looked like the goddess
Mhm.
to us. And so I started to use the cards compulsively. Karen started to use them the same way, obsessively, and we couldn't stop. And we really played with the tarot cards, 3 or 4 hours a day. And we wrote a novel that we used the tarot cards as a resource for writing. And, we just had a lot of fun. We had moved to Berkeley with almost no money, but with degrees. So we told the lending agent at the time at the co-op credit union that we didn't want jobs, even though we had degrees and we could get jobs if we needed to. But we wanted to write a book and not to worry, we would pay the mortgage. And amazingly, he said, okay. And we signed the papers and had a house in Berkeley. It was a miracle, but not so much at the time. But looking back on it, it was one of many miracles that actually led to the unfolding of the Motherpeace. And
So
then
you,
from there, it was just, one thing led to another, and our research poured into the images. And we had never drawn pictures before, either one of us. And so it was just a phenomenon. A
yeah,
treasure, I believe, in the Tibetan sense.
yes.
We were born to it.
Yes, and so one aspect that we might miss is that you have been drawing it.
Yes.
I was just checking this card that came today, for our talk, and I was seeing the horse, and I'm like, a horse. I've never really drawn a horse. I find like it was so easy, for you to make it, to draw it, to depict what.
Well, this is such a good card for you to choose in regard to that, because what happened was in 1978 in the summer, my two daughters, who were preteens at the time, were invited to go and live with their dad for a year. They had never done that. And I said yes, because they really wanted to. And the minute they were, well, no, even before they left, I went to the flea market, which was an ordinary thing, but I happened to find a tarot deck, and it was missing two cards. One was the Fool, and one was the Page of Swords.
Hmm.
And so I decided, and there were two blanks in the deck, because in those days there were always blanks. They always had two blanks. Later, US Games told me that they decided Americans couldn't handle blanks.
Mhm,
They thought something was wrong.
mhm,
So they stopped making them. They started writing things on them. But in those days, they were blank. And I took those two cards and I drew pictures just for fun to fill in the deck for my daughters. And I copied the Fool just like it was in the weight deck. But then when I was looking at the Page of Swords, I thought, well, they're girls. This is a young boy, but they're girls. So I'm going to make a young girl. And I decided, for what reason, I don't know at this point, I decided to make her a young Amazon warrior. I
mhm,
had somehow come across the Amazons already, and so I made her an Amazon. She's whistling for the north wind. It was all part of the Robert Graves
mm,
white goddess mythology. And she has a whirlwind in her mind, and she's calling the north wind as a white horse.
mm,
And then she's very grounded. Her elements are air and earth. So she has the four-footed animals as well, including the little javelina, the little boar,
mhm,
because the Amazons were buried with boar's tusks. It was
mhm.
one of their attributes.
So something I didn't tell you, Vicky, but just before our interview, I was outside and on my way, I was driving. There was a white horse
Oh,
running,
oh,
running to the edge of the road,
oh,
running.
that's
And I'm
amazing.
like, this is like, even like just like slow down to just take time to, it arrived at the same time I was driving. So
Oh, and
this.
when I was a child, my mother, I always thought my mother had sort of a natural, unconscious pagan impulse, because we weren't very religious at all in our family. But she taught me, when you see a white horse, you lick your thumb,
Mhm.
you stamp your palm, and you stamp it with your fist, and then that's
Okay,
the thing on a
wait.
white horse. So you lick it, put it on the palm, stamp it. and
Okay,
make your
and my wish is sent to the universe.
one of my early witchy teachings.
This is amazing. One
Yeah.
of what I'm noticing, so there are two things about this deck. The first thing is the synchronicities kept coming very strongly with this deck. So that's one aspect I'm noticing strongly. And it's very infused, it means for me, with magic, and it's kind of like harmon
Yes.
uh, flowing. It's in the flow. So that's the one thing.
Yes. Yes.
The second thing that I'm noticing is that now I'm starting to use it fully, and I got this book to dive into it. I don't know if I will be able to go back to the older decks because it shows every card in a so different way, but
Yes.
also a way that speaks my language as I feel it speaks my language. So one of the cards also that came for our talk today is the Ten of Swords.
Ah,
Talks
ouch.
Yes. And it talks about, the priestesses of Athena and how
Yeah.
they jumped into the waters because of the arrival of patriarchy and so on. But it came reversed. But what I mean is that when I read it, I know I hold that memory within me. It feels that I am this, I am here. I witnessed it. So, um,
Well, that's so much what we felt in the making of the cards. We felt as if, first of all, we were remembering something. It wasn't just a fantasy, it was a memory coming through and remembering a time when women were free. And so a lot of our purpose or our motivation in making the images and making the deck ultimately was to provide a stimulus for women to remember.
mhm,
That was our purpose, and as well as the fact that we're inundated with so many negative images as women in patriarchal culture, and especially now that we have so much social media and so much visual activity in media. Um, so we wanted to get those negative images out. It's a form of psychic cleaning,
mm,
and then you have to replace the negative images with something positive.
mhm,
Otherwise, the old pattern will just return
mhm,
because it's habitual.
mhm.
So those were our two purposes, I guess you could say, or the hidden meaning, in what we were doing to
And it's
wake women up.
what I love also in the way you approach this work is, you bring the spiritual, the history, the facts all in together. So it feels like a teaching tarot
Uh-huh.
deck. But I didn't get yet the other book about the practices and the rituals. But I feel like there is this idea of bridging, acting as
Yeah.
the bridge. We don't deny the science. We're not denying the history and the facts. We're just bringing our own understanding, and here is how we apply it today.
Yes. Well, it's what in the 70s we called bringing a feminist lens
Mhm,
to it. Instead of the male gaze, we're bringing the female gaze. And so it makes agents out of us. It provides agency for
mhm.
women to be at the center of our thoughts and our unearthing of all this, rather than always at the periphery, always at the mercy of what men think and what they write and what they say.
Yeah, and the story about this card that came reversed, I'm learning with this type of cards to see the left and the right and the up.
Uh,
I don't read usually reversal, but with this one, I find it very interesting. And this one with the reversed, I was reading, you said women facing the enemy, they were pushed to the limit and they had to come through sacrifice and loss. you know, as a topic for us today, it feels that we cannot act as before. We have to find a new way, and this tarot deck is found another way, to
yes,
bridge.
yes.
Are there any cards that you had to reinvent from your way, from your perspective?
Almost from the beginning. You
Mm,
know, the second deck that we worked with, the first one was the weight deck very thoroughly, and then the Crowley deck, what's called the Thoth deck.
yes.
Um, much darker, much more magical in terms of the Western magical tradition that Aleister Crowley was part of. So I also really cut my teeth on that deck, and I loved it. The paintings are beautiful, the magic, you know, he was kind of a dark magician, but at the same time, so intelligent. And some of the elemental teachings that he made, I use in my systems of teaching Motherpeace. For instance, the fact that there are two elements in each of the so-called court cards, what we call the people cards. And each one has two elements. So the daughters represent earth and the swords represent air. So this is the earth of air. And each of the people cards can be understood in that way, which was extremely helpful, very deep structurally. And, you know, Karen and I decided, even though we were breaking form with the Motherpeace cards, making them round instead of rectangular, you know, so that they can really fall any which way. And the circle is understood to be feminine.
Yes.
I sort of hate the word feminine now, the way it's been diluted, but
Yes.
okay. And so, for example, in Crowley's deck, the seven of discs is called, he always has subtitles. It's called failure. So we had been working with the weight deck with the gardener kind of you know, resting on his hoe in the garden and feeling a little dejected, but not so bad, but failure. And so I had a kind of epiphany one day with that card, and I thought, no, it's not a failure, it's gestation. There's something growing, but you can't see it. You know, it's under the earth, it's in her belly. So I'll try to find it without losing too much time here, the seven of discs in our deck. And we used Crowley's names for the deck, for the, you know, so discs instead of pentacles. I guess that was the only one. So the seven of discs we reinterpreted entirely, even though we never broke from the structure of the tarot. We always felt that the structure was very, very deep and very right. And here we go. So the seven of discs is a pregnant woman. She's like a fairy woman. She's sitting in a pumpkin patch, and she's, you know, she's about 7 months along. And the pumpkins are not ripe. They won't be ripe for another month or two. And so the meaning of the card is patience, not failure. Patience. You have to wait. But everything is good. It's all good. It's positive. So we felt like there was a lot of patriarchal overlay that was negative in that deck, and maybe in the whole tradition as it had grown up over centuries. And so that's the way we began to bring our feminist thinking to the images. So we changed a lot of them.
Yeah.
The one that took me the longest, the one that was the extreme challenge for me, you know, sometimes what we did was very fun because we didn't have to work and we had so little money, but it didn't take any money to live in Berkeley at that time. So on less than $500 a month, we did everything. We walked a lot and we went to used bookstores, and you know, we just had such a nice time. And I always did yoga in the morning for a couple of hours, and then we would have a nice breakfast. You know, we were eating natural foods and learning about food as medicine. And then we would spend the afternoon doing our work, our reading, our research, our drawing. And we were drawing cards every day for a year. And the card that presented the most challenge for me was the Hierophant. what they used to call the Pope, and then it was called the Hierophant, but it was still a picture of a Pope or a very important priest. This one, I reconstructed it as the very first religion that we know of in the West that was led by men, where the men took over the priesthood. Always before that, the women were priests, even the women were priestesses in the goddess religion, even in the big empires, like Mesopotamia and Egypt and so on. Still, the women were the priestesses. And that was pretty much worldwide, I think. And so this is a priest of Mithras from 500 BCE. And that's it changed. That's when the men actually put on women's robes, see, women's dresses, a breastplate, a gold breastplate with gemstones that was oracular with astrological meaning. You see that the nature is now walled off. The mystery is now only for the priests. And whereas the job of the Hierophant, the actual function of the Hierophant is to mediate between the mystery and the people. But priests are holding it all. We're not supposed to have direct experience anymore. And
Yes.
so the women are on their knees. The scroll gives the laws, the right and wrong. This is the should card. But there was so much in it for me. I was working with the whole thing, how patriarchy took over the psychic religious aspect of our lives, state control of our religious experiences. So I worked on this card for 3 weeks. And in the time, talk about synchronicity, as I was completing the drawing and really bringing the research to it, it's very complex, probably the most complicated one in the deck. And as I was doing that, I received in galley form from Harper, my publisher, I received, well, they weren't even my publisher yet. So I don't even know why I got those galleys, but I did. I got galleys for Mary Daly's book, Gyne Ecology, Gyne/ecology. And it was about the patriarchal atrocities committed against women all over the world. It was just mind blowing. And it was very much about this kind of consciousness. And so it was such an incredible synchronicity. So I read that book and told my publisher that I liked it. I guess but no, I really didn't. I didn't have a book publisher until after the cards came out. So I don't really know even why they sent it to me, but they did, and it was amazing. And I really felt that I was on the right track, that I understood that all the religions, all the world religions kind of have the same attitude toward women, which is a negative one, and that they should be on their knees. And so that's how that card came, and it was the most difficult one, the one that took the longest. Sometimes a drawing could be completed in a day, and 3 weeks was an enormous outlay of time, but well worth it. But then later, when Karen and when I learned from Mary Greer the system of numerology connected with the major arcana cards, then it was problematic because I had written about the emperor and I had written about the Hierophant as really only negative and having to do with state control and having to do with the advent of patriarchy. And so I had to rethink the archetypes for the women in my classes who had the number 5, the Hierophant, or the number 4, the emperor. I had to rethink them in a deeper, more archetypal and structural way. So what happened for me then was that I decided you can best do that by seeing the foreground and the background. of the cards. And you can do it with all the cards, but this one works very well because the background is officially guarded by a guard with swords who does not let the normal public into the mystery,
Yes.
but keeps us in the dark and in ignorance. Um, so so I figured out with help from from the tradition and from the archetypal work that the Hierophant is a bridge,
Mm-hmm.
is meant to be a bridge, like a shaman, a bridge between the invisible world and the physical world, and someone who uses systems to explain the mystery so
Mm-hmm.
that people can have understanding and have connection with the mystery. That's the shaman function of the number five. And we had even thought about revisioning the cards in that way to make the Hierophant a shaman or to make the emperor, some kind of a CEO or something. Um, but we decided we wanted to stay with the revision of history, and so we did.
Very
So that it could,
interesting. Very
go ahead.
interesting that you talk about this because I think there is like a small portion, of this religion, Mithras, in Ostia that I've seen in Italy. They came from. I hope I'm really remembering well because I have like a memory that slips things. But there was like these steps, like there was like 7 or 8 or 9 steps, and everyone had symbols that the initiate had to master before going to the next step, but it was held by man. And those who were outside couldn't know the mysteries. And I stood there for maybe an hour trying
Ah,
to draw because I'm like how come nobody wants to study the mysteries or enter the mysteries? And I guess this is very interesting because now that there are no walls, no curtains, no guardians, the mysteries are drawn in the floor and they are seen by everyone. So it was it was something really interesting to notice how time or kind of like things are reversing. Um,
uh-huh.
so yeah,
Yes, in the 1970s, when we were working on the cards, there was a tremendous widespread interest in general in the Western magical tradition and esoteric science. So we were studying with a psychic teacher. We were learning things from a witch that was teaching us about Wicca. We were doing all kinds of things, learning healing. I had really good hands-on healing as a natural, and we were doing all those things, and then all of that poured into the cards.
yes.
And now there's much less interest in all of those things. They're much more, they've moved to science and the scientific level. And so the way that healing is spoken about is so different from when we were becoming healers.
Hmm. So why did you call it Mother Peace?
Well, that was our friend Cassandra Light. That was her. She came up with that word.
Mhm.
She's the person who first, when I made my first card, the Six of Wands, it's in a wheel, a woman in a wheel. And she said, "Oh, it's going to be a round deck." And we said, "Oh, of course." Then at some point, when we were trying to decide about the name of it, she called it Motherpeace. And
Hmm.
we love that because it's the entire paradigm, the peace
Hmm.
of the mother. But we made it one word. People often separate them, but it's not to be separated. It's one word, Motherpeace. And
Hmm.
it's the entire tradition of women's culture
Hmm.
all the way back to our evolutionary beginnings,
Hmm.
because I really believe that women and women's biology is the key to our human evolution.
Hmm.
And so to take it all the way back on, I don't know if they write this anymore, but it used to be on the deck. Maybe they don't say it anymore. We used to say it was 30,000 years of women's culture.
Mm.
That was the original deck. You know, we self-published originally and then later contracted with US Games.
Yes. So talking with you is like flowing, and I feel like I can't stop it. But we are coming to an end for today. And if I say this deck is about women or feminists, or how would you define, I would say, feminism today, or woman history, or do you see the definition for that has changed? Where is it going through your vision?
Well, I think it's threatened like you know, like one of the animals that's threatened with extinction. We have to be really mindful about feminism because it's not as if we're post-feminist. I mean, we're not, it's not like we're post-patriarchal.
Mhm,
The patriarchy is you know, rabid at the moment and really active and really the misogyny, the public discourse is filled with woman hatred,
mhm,
misogyny. And so there's a need, an ongoing need, as always, for feminist analysis and awareness and mindfulness
mhm,
uh, more than ever. But it's always more than ever, I think. You know, in the 70s, because of, really mainly because of the revolutionary atmosphere when Pluto and Uranus made a conjunction in the middle of the 1960s. And everything broke open in that revolutionary moment on the globe. And
mhm,
so all over the world, things opened and old patterns, old rigid structures shattered. And
mhm,
so the free love and the hippies and the music, the Beatles, all everything that happened in the mid 60s and into the 70s, which was
mhm,
more my active time,
mhm,
all of that was extreme freedom. I
mhm,
mean, it was so truly liberating for so many different classes of people. Uh,
mhm,
and certainly, you know, white women have been accused, or the women's movement, let's say, has been accused of being a white women's movement. I think in the beginning that was probably true in the wide expression of it because of our privilege, you know,
mhm,
and we weren't even aware
mhm,
of that privilege at the time. But of course, that's how it happened, and that's how Harper San Francisco came to find me and to
mhm,
see if I would write a book. You know, that, I mean, that never happens now. That's
mhm,
like completely off the table. But in those days, that level of cultural support and that openness in the culture and that curiosity about new thought and new concepts and but we learned as young feminists doing our own studies in the 70s that the first women's movement of the suffragists, you know, that really they said everything we said. We didn't have any new ideas.
mhm.
It's just that it got buried, and
Yes.
it always gets buried. And
Mhm.
then the next generation has to almost reinvent the wheel, you know.
Yes.
And then you discover, as we did, you know, this amazing history. And the other thing that was so interesting in the 70s was that the Native American activists in the United States, the AIM movement, American Indian movement, they were very fierce with white people, saying, you know, go back to your own roots. Don't take our stuff. Don't take our religion. Don't take our ways. Go get your own. Go back to your own roots. And at the time, I thought, well, Presbyterian, I can't do that. You know, that's what I grew up with. And it didn't mean anything to me anymore. Quite the opposite. Um, and so I think the move that we instinctually made to go way back to our roots, to old Europe, you know, to 8,000 years ago, and unearth and rediscover that civilization and understand that we white people, we people with European ancestry, weren't always colonizers, weren't always, it was the Indo-European mix with the old European farming culture that made us the hybrid that we are today. And there's something about that old European culture that flows through women's culture, that comes through the weaving and the sewing and the embroideries and the
Pottery.
dances and the, yes, everything that what we call the folk tradition in Europe is really the women's tradition gone underground, slightly underground. You know, you can still go to the mountains in Italy or in places in Central Europe and Eastern Europe and find the old festivals. They're still happening, and
Yes,
they have the motifs of the old European goddess culture. So it's not lost. It's just it's subterranean.
yes,
It has to spring up inside of us, which it did in the 1970s in a very dramatic way.
yes,
And you know, then the backlash is what we're seeing today. The backlash is terrific.
yes,
So it's part of the karmic unfolding of everything, you know. And even the moment we're in right now, I think, is something like that. It's a very unpleasant moment for so many of us, but it's karmic in its own way, you know. Women took back what was missing, what had been taken from us as a people. And now men as a people, as a class, are really mad about that.
yes.
And, you know,
What is fascinating about, your background and the path you've taken, is that spirituality is connected with social movement.
yes,
It's
yes,
connected with community. It's not something
yes,
separate like the church. This church system and mosque system does not work when we approach the goddess and the great mother. It's everything is intertwined,
everything.
everything is connected, and the
Yes.
reparation. I feel with your work, the reparation inside has to be mirrored outside
Mhm,
also in our
mhm.
interconnections to everything the
Yes,
active. I find as I'm studying in this path, I found many of the movement you've brought, the carriers are into eco, which means
yes, yes,
ecosystem guardians of the ecosystem,
yes.
through the anyway, everything, all these beautiful women have jumped into the social and world, kind of like for you,
Absolutely.
history, anthropology, and so on. So we are active, we are not isolated.
Yes, I've always said, you know, about Motherpeace that it's not New Age. Motherpeace has never been New Age
Hmm.
because it's not spirituality separate from
Hmm.
life.
Hmm.
It's really a return to Mother Earth
Hmm.
and an understanding that we all belong to nature. We all belong, you know, and we broke from that. Christianity broke from that in such a harsh way.
Hmm.
Um, and with the domination paradigm that
Hmm.
we're to dominate nature, you know, it's terrible. We're part of nature. We belong to her.
Hmm.
And so there is no separation. Starhawk puts it beautifully. She talks about the immanence,
Hmm.
that the goddess is here now, always, everywhere. It's not some deity that lives up in a cloud, you know, and judges us and smites enemies. It's not like that.
Hmm.
That is a made-up story. And
Hmm.
we've been living in a different story for the last 40 years. So
Hmm.
that's pretty amazing. You know, I
Yes.
feel that we'll take it with us. I'm old now, you know, I have to think about that. And so
I think we are here to carry that message also, and that's one of the goals of this video. And maybe one day we can talk about the perversion of these feminist principles. How have they been um, diverted? I think the
yes, yes,
studying the strategy is very important for us now to understand, okay, this is the mechanism that is going, this is
uh-huh,
how they are diluting the message. I think
yes.
that would be really valuable for us
That's a wonderful thought. It's dilution and distortion.
Yes,
That's
yes,
happened. And I think it's not always on purpose.
yeah.
It's part of popular culture. It's how, the esoteric teachers like Alice Bailey wrote once, for instance, that the intuitives, uh, the creatives, the intuitives, that there are these archetypes floating around, in the ethers, and the intuitives apprehend an archetype and bring it down through the vehicle, through the
Mhm,
personality, through the particular time and place. And then it goes into the mainstream, and then it gets diluted to the
mhm,
point where you hardly recognize it.
mhm.
And that's just the way it
It is.
is.
Yes.
And so that was one of my earliest understandings, which
Mhm.
has been very helpful because otherwise I would be in despair.
Yes,
But I see that that's how it happens.
but it never dies. That's why we
But it
say.
never dies. And
Yeah,
there are young women coming to it all the time, coming to the Motherpeace, coming to Shakti Woman, so here we are.
yes.
We continue, we pass the torch, we just keep going.
Yeah, hopefully we can play a role in that for those who are listening. So yeah, thank you so much, Vicky. I would love to welcome you again in this channel, maybe talking about one of your amazing other books. But yeah, thank you
I'd
so
be
much.
honored.
So Motherpeace is available on Amazon, on all the shops that you know. And yeah, if you have it, I would love to know how you are using it and with what are you using it. We talk also about associating other decks and doing creative reading. So I'm always curious about it. Thank you so much, Vicky.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. It's really nice to spend time with you.
Thank you.